This episode contains themes of an adult nature, including depictions of assault, kidnapping, and graphic violence. Viewer discretion is advised. Episode 4, Temple of the Ebon Hand. Evil rarely announces itself. It doesn't wear a crown. It doesn't march under banners. It hides in quiet streets, behind familiar doors, among ordinary faces. It studies the weak. It waits for the forgotten. And it feeds on those no one is watching. Children disappear, neighbors whisper, authorities look the other way, because the truth is inconvenient. Monsters don't live outside the walls. They live in here with us. And stopping them is never the work of one person. It takes vigilance, trust, and the willingness to stand together against the things that should have never been allowed to exist in the first place. Heavy is the collar. Once again, we were all limping around Olaf's like we had been run over by a stampeding herd of horses. Sure, Gisselfried attended to the worst of the wounds, but he's just one man, and nowadays he splits his training between his priestly duties and his newfound fascination with the arcane. We'd found that brewing healing potions was a necessity, so quite a bit of his time was spent over a mortar and pestle as well. We had that spell book from the wizard Torden Cran had hired, and every spare moment over the next couple of weeks was spent with Anagio Quig, learning spells, and when we had the money for ink, transcribing them into our own books. We'd made some decent money from loot we had escaped with at Cran's hideout, and the complex under the Grayson house. Far more than our jobs at Rogue Moon provided. But everything a wizard does is so damn expensive. I suppose the acquisition of power is an investment. Suffice it to say, our meeting at the Sword Throwers Club was coming up, and we were trying not to look like we were on death's door when we showed up to meet Lady Delana. We were learning quickly that looks matter in Ptolus, so we managed to walk off the worst of the limps and get the bandages to where they wouldn't soak through and could be concealed underneath clothing. Speaking of clothing, we were about to go to an exclusive bar in the Nobles Quarter, and we were determined to dress for the occasion. We passed by Sachets and purchased some extra clothing, a bit more on the finer side than we were used to. We then took it all back to Olaf so Fawn could make the necessary alterations. We were still hiding her, and she was increasingly anxious to get back to work, so this was our compromise. She got something to do, plus some coin, and we got clothing that made us appear as if we weren't living in a flop house in the docks. The time came for the meeting, and we splurged a little by hiring a carriage. If we were going to the Nobles Quarter, we at least wanted to look like we belonged there. I never realized how bumpy carriages are, and when you pack a bunch of people into one, let's just say we were all very glad to get out of the thing and have a bit of room to stretch. Rich folk problems, huh? We made it to the gates of the Nobles Quarter without issue, and our invitations to the Sword Throwers Club got us entry, no problem. The club wasn't very far from the gate, so we were soon filing out of the carriage into the street. Looking around, we saw that while our clothes were really nice, they weren't necessarily Nobles Quarter nice. No matter how fine the clothing is, without the proper accessories, it just feels like something is missing. We weren't exactly in a position financially to encrust ourselves in gold and gems, so this would have to do. When we entered the club, the host examined our invitations and told us Lady Delana was waiting for us in a private room toward the back of the establishment. We were guided to the appropriate door where the host knocked gently, saying, "Your guests have arrived." The door swung open, revealing the rather menacing face of Lady Delana's bodyguard, Andrew. This guy always looked like he just watched you kick his favorite puppy. He stepped to the side, revealing Lady Delana going through some documents at a large table. I got the feeling that we were just one of many appointments she had that day. She looked up and motioned for us to sit so our meeting could begin. She got right down to the point. She wanted to know who was behind the business with the Red Warehouse and what their goals were. We essentially told her that those involved no longer had any goals because we found the organization responsible and ended it permanently. She arched an eyebrow and sat back in her seat, no longer looking at the pile of documents. We gave her the details about Torden Cran and his operation. The two men we killed in the Red Warehouse were two of the enforcers for his Midtown protection racket. They had accepted a job, and to fulfill that job, they had decided to use bribes and conduct their business in the warehouse and pin the aftermath on Rogue Moon. See, framing it that way felt like we would make our contribution seem more beneficial to the company. We added that Cran was expanding his operations and having some compromised real estate with good bones hitting the market at a reduced price would help his organization grow. He was killing two birds with one stone. He just wasn't prepared for people like us to catch wind of his dealings, become suitably invested, and decide that kicking indoors and bleeding his people out was necessary. She knew about the hit on the house in Midtown that left over a dozen corpses in its wake, but she hadn't realized who had made the hit or why. She feverishly wrote in her little book as we provided the details. And once story time was over, she leaned forward over the table. She praised us for our diligence and the thorough manner in which we addressed the situation. Then she placed a big fat purse on the table and slid it toward us, promising there would be much more where that came from if we continued to work with her. She had a couple of offers she presented to us then. The first was that we leave our current positions at Rogue Moon and work directly for House Abanar. The advantages were that we would have the financial backing of one of the most powerful noble houses in Ptolus, and we'd be instantly connected with some very influential people. The downside was, we'd be collared. We would belong to House Abanar, and when they say jump, we jump. The second offer was that we become part of a pool of independent contractors. We wouldn't have the contacts or the financial backing the first option would provide, but we would have our freedom, with the potential of being hired on an as-needed basis. We asked for a minute to weigh the options of the two offers and excused ourselves. It quickly became apparent that most of us did not like the idea of being on Abanar's payroll. A golden collar is still a collar. Operating independently would allow us to choose what we did, when we did it, and for whom we wanted to do it. We returned to the room to tell Lady Delana we had elected to remain independent of House Abanar, but that she should feel free to reach out to us should there be further need of our services. If that disappointed her, she hid it well. There's something about her that led me to believe rejection was not a common occurrence with her. We stayed a while longer to take advantage of the open tab, and even if for only one night, get a taste of how the other half lives. But ultimately, we were fish out of water, and we needed to get back to where we felt like we belonged. Loose ends in the wind. Of course, we didn't give all the information we had to Lady Delana. We had another lead, just a name, Methyl. We felt we had fully carried out our job for House Abanar by destroying Tord and Cran's little empire. He was the one compromising Rogue Moon, not his employer. Methyl we wanted all to ourselves. The problem was all we had was the name. We would have loved to have had more information, but after Ruger taught Cran how to breathe through his neck, the font of information kind of dried up. Over the next couple of weeks, we continued to take it easy. We abandoned our mundane jobs at the docks and decided to enjoy the fruits of our labor and recently acquired windfalls. I spent a bit more time learning what I could and expanding my skills with magic. Despite the necessary distractions, we could still do some snooping and ask a few questions. After a week without finding anything new on Methyl, Fawn had had enough of hiding. She wanted to get back to her life and her job, and part of me couldn't fault her for that. However, we all knew the man that hired her assassins was still out there, and could make another attempt on her life. We had to let her go, or else she would become our prisoner, and none of us were okay with that proposition. It isn't as if we were going to just wish her well, let her walk out the door, and hope for the best. Xavier decided to quit his job at the docks and relocate nearer his sister so that he could keep a better eye on her. And naturally, we took turns tailing her as well, and watching her house and sachets. One of the nifty little items we liberated from Cran's place was a wand that was imbued with the alarm spell. So I was able to use it on the doors to Fawn's apartment, to give us a heads up in case someone decided to let themselves in. With us watching over Fawn from the shadows, if someone made a move, we could squeeze them for the information and hopefully pay this Methel a visit. Alas, it was not meant to be. After a few weeks of taking turns watching over Fawn, nothing out of the ordinary happened. We couldn't keep up this level of surveillance forever, and with no additional leads, we decided to cut our losses. I could maintain the alarm spells just in case, but the trail had gone cold, and it was time our lives returned to normal. The missing children. It's no secret that I have a soft spot for orphans, given the fact that I never knew my parents and was raised in an orphanage myself. We always knew if we didn't have each other's backs, no one else would. From what I can tell, I even had it pretty good compared to some of the kids in other orphanages I've seen. I continue to do my best to make the rounds and give the kids an older brother figure, someone they can rely on if they have nowhere else to turn. One of the orphanages in Ptolus that I frequent, as often as I can, is called Tin Pin Orphanage. It's in eastern Midtown, not far from the docks, and is run by a half-elf woman named Sister Luana Germain. She belongs to the Order of Dyra, an all-female order that, unfortunately, is affiliated with the Lothian faith. The order is known for their works tending to the poor, feeding the hungry, running orphanages, and engaging in other charitable endeavors. Despite the link to Lothian, we got along well, and she was very appreciative of my frequent visits. And truth be told, I enjoyed the escape, playing with the children, helping out around the orphanage. I used my skills to fix broken items, mend fences and shutters, and generally make myself useful. I would also leave donations to help keep the kids clothed and fed when I had the coin to spare. On one such visit, Sister Luana confided in me that she was concerned about one of the girls. Celine is a pretty 13-year-old redhead with green eyes. Always cheerful, and being one of the older children is usually a big help around the orphanage. Sister Luana had noticed she had a male friend, her own age, that was not a resident of Tin Pin, someone from the neighborhood. From time to time, Celine would go missing for short periods, presumably to meet up with this friend. The problem is, she went missing a few nights ago and has not been seen since. Sister Luana said she went to the city watch, but they just assumed it was another orphan running away and paid her no heed. When she told me this, it brought to mind the poster I took from a bulletin board in Midtown about another missing child. I told her I'd keep an eye out, but she probably didn't expect much. To her, I'm just a young blacksmith with a fondness for orphans. Honestly, it's probably best she doesn't know I moonlight as a vigilante. As good a person as she is, she's still a follower of Lothian, and I'm not quite sure I can ever completely trust one. Regardless, I was motivated to look into what I suspected may turn out to be a horrible trend of missing children. When I let the others know what I suspected was going on and why I had that impression, They were quick to agree we needed to investigate these disappearances. We started by asking around about anything unusual to people in the vicinity of Tenpin Orphanage. This turned up a few accounts of Celine hanging out with who was apparently her boyfriend. Figuring out who this boyfriend was and determining if he knew anything drove us to look around the area deeper. The boy we soon discovered was Linus Wedgwood, the son of a human potter with a shop on Jester Street. We sought out the shop and found the boy, helping his father in his workshop. He seemed hesitant to talk in the presence of his father, but when his father had to step away to tend to a customer, we had the opportunity to speak with him alone. I had the feeling Linus's father didn't approve of his son hanging around with an orphan girl, and though he was a bit hesitant after his father left, he eventually opened up. Linus said that he and Celine had been hanging out in the branches of a tree in an old vacant lot not far from the orphanage. They had lost track of time and it had gotten dark, and that's when they were approached by two strange men. He said the two ugly, scary-looking men hobbled up to the tree and angrily demanded that they get down. Two of the things that stood out to him was that one of the men was a hunchback, and the other was a tall man with a peg leg. The children were so scared they just did what the men said and climbed down out of the tree. Once they were down, the men demanded that they lift their clothes and examine their bodies. Linus said they were looking for birthmarks, and since he didn't have one, they lost interest in him. However, they saw something on Celine and started to try to drag her off with them. She tried to fight them off, but they were much larger and were easily able to overpower her. Linus was trying to hold back tears as he told us how the men were taking her away. But then he said a tall, balding, homeless man who lived in the area, a man called Turd, began shouting at the two men to let her go. This distraction was all Celine needed to twist free of their grasp, and she ran. She and Linus risked glances over their shoulders as they fled, and saw the two men beating Turd as the beggar lay on the ground. Linus and Celine ran as fast as they could, darting between buildings, cutting through yards and over fences to make sure they were not followed. He said they were terrified, and I could see by the slight tremor in his fingers, he still was. Once they were certain no one was following them, Celine walked Linus back to his house and agreed to meet again the following night, but Linus says she never showed up. He thought they must have gotten to her and was afraid they may return for him. We left the potter's shop, stunned. Sure, we had seen our share of violence and illicit activities, but this was the first time any of us had ever seen kids actively being targeted. We had a few ideas why these men would want Celine and possibly other children, and none of them were nice. We had another lead to chase, Turd, the homeless man who distracted the two men, but we would have to put some effort into finding him. And there was a second lead, an easier one to track down. We decided to split our efforts and also look into the other missing girl from the flyer. Tyrick and Gisselfried decided they would go to the Black Swan and run down the names on the flyer, Toman and Karen Jovan. Myself, Ruger, and Phelan decided to scout out the area described by Linus and look for Turd. It took some effort, but we were able to find Turd. And turns out, Turd is not his real name. It was given to him as a cruel nickname by locals that were not very fond of him. His real name is Jeremy, and it didn't take long to see that he was a little slow-witted. He was cautious at first, but we told him we were trying to find out where Celine had gone, and he quickly changed his tune. According to Jeremy, Celine had always been kind to him. even standing up for him against those who insisted on calling him Turd. This small gesture endeared Celine to Jeremy, so he wanted to help if he could. He recalled the events of that night, saying he spotted the two kids from a distance playing in a small tree on the edge of a vacant lot when the two men approached them. He said he saw the men make the kids come down from the tree and then start to pull up their shirts at the order of the two men. Jeremy, it turns out, is a good man, and he could tell the kids were very unhappy about what was going on, so he decided to intervene. He said he started shouting at the two men, who turned to see who he was, and it was then that the kids were able to get away. He said the two men were very angry at him, and they beat him pretty badly for interfering. He said one of the men threatened to cut off his hand, but the other one, the hunchback, said he didn't deserve the blessing. Strange. And once it was clear that Jeremy was no longer a threat, they left him curled up and lying on the ground. While this information supported what we had learned from Linus, we didn't learn anything new. Until Jeremy added that he had seen these men before. He told us that he didn't know their names, but he had seen them before in a bar near the Warrens called the Troll Skull Tavern. We finally had a really promising lead we could pursue. We found the bar without much difficulty and went in to check it out. I was embarrassed I had not found the place myself, but it is a big city and I had been avoiding the area around the Warrens intentionally. Predictably, it was a pretty rough and run-down establishment, making the Savage Shark look rather nice. We got ourselves some drinks and quietly began planning our next move. We knew we would stake out the place, but we'd have to split up and watch the place in shifts to ensure we were around the next time they came calling. For the moment, we were all very invested and none of us wanted to leave just yet. So we split up, sitting in different places around the bar, just in case one of us could catch a bit of conversation containing something useful. As we were sitting there, sipping watered-down ale and eavesdropping on other patrons, we heard the distinctive noise of a man walking with a peg leg. Trying to appear disinterested, I looked up from my ale to see a tall, ugly man limping heavily on a partially wooden leg, headed toward the bar. He locked eyes on the bartender, and I started glancing around at the others, noting that they all saw him. From the descriptions Linus and Jeremy gave us, this was our guy. The only problem was that he came alone. It didn't take long to see this guy was not the most popular patron. The bartender gruffly addressed him as Hendrak, and he wasted no time rudely ordering a bit of food, complaining about everything, from the service to the quality of the food and the drink. The guy did not seem capable of saying a single positive thing. And once he was done with his tirade on the contents of his bowl and mug, he started in on rat men. He blamed them for all that was wrong with the city, accusing them of kidnapping children in the streets, eating pets, spreading disease, and anything else he could think of. He was not keeping this between himself and the barkeep either. It seemed like he wanted the whole bar to know about it. Once he finished his bowl of, we'll call it, stew, he rudely tossed some coins on the bar and began limping toward the door. I stood, trying to act casual, and discreetly motioned for everyone else to stay put. I slipped out into yet another rainy, tolless evening and began trailing him. He was easy to follow, tall, slow, and with a noticeable limp. I followed him through several dive bars in Midtown, where he repeated this same performance. It was like he had a script. He'd go in, order something, insult the establishment and everything in it. Then he'd get loud like he wanted everyone in the bar to hear and complain about rat men. He did this several times at all the bars he stopped at. After about the fourth bar, he paused at an intersection near Catterwood, and there, a really ugly man with a pronounced hunchback joined him, and together they began heading north toward the Temple District. I'll admit I was pretty excited. I wanted to get a little closer to see if I could hear anything they were saying. But Hendrak looked right at me. I wasn't sure if he had recognized me, but I had just been at all the same bars as he. So I thought it best if I broke off the pursuit, thinking I could tail them again another time. I decided to then meet back up with Tyrek and Giss, and we all three returned to the Troll Skull Tavern, where Ruger and Phelan were eagerly waiting for me to return. I filled them in on our target's routine, along with the possibility that they had noticed me tailing them. Uncertain of the degree of the setback, we continued to monitor the tavern. I would take on a more of a support role since it was likely they were on to me. I could still be useful by coordinating groups using magical messages and keeping an eye on what was going on in the streets around the tavern. Since I was in another part of town when I was spotted, we felt sure that Hendrak and his hunchback friend would return to the Troll Skull Tavern at some point. In the meantime, we got an update from Tyrek and Giss concerning their trip to the Black Swan. They said they spoke with the half-elf owner Migos while he was tending bar. When they asked about the flyer, Migos told them that many others had come inquiring about the child, but so far nothing had turned up. He directed them to a booth in the back of the tavern where Toman and Karen sat, apparently looking tired and hopeless. These two were friends of the parents who had recently been spending their days in the Black Swan, waiting for adventurers to come inquire about the flyer or to hear of any clues anyone may have discovered. They said that the poor parents were beside themselves with grief. They were told the missing girl is the 12-year-old daughter of a dry goods merchant. She has black hair and brown eyes, and her name is Christiane. She had been missing for weeks now, and many were beginning to give up hope that she would ever be found. People were starting to whisper that she had been taken below the city by rat men. The two took Tyrek and Giss to the girl's house, where they were allowed to look at her room for clues. They could tell they were not the only ones who had gone through the girl's belongings, though. Apparently, other groups had also been given the same courtesy. Predictably, they found nothing concrete other than the lack of signs of forced entry, so they thought it unlikely she was abducted from her room. They asked to speak with Christiane's parents, so they could ask them about the girl's habits, her friends, hobbies, or anything else they could think of. They asked if Christiane had any birthmarks, and her parents said that she does indeed have one. They indicated it was like a rune, but the description was not consistent with any dwarven runes I had ever seen. That seemed to be a pretty solid link between Christiane and Celine. They got some names of some of her friends just in case they saw or knew anything. There's a theory that she may have snuck out to be with her friends after all. So they then tracked down two of the friends, a girl named Janice and a boy named Edwin. One of the kids admitted they were supposed to meet up that night with Christiane, but Christiane never showed. We all thought it was likely that she was intercepted on the way to this meeting. So now we have two girls, one 12, the other 13, both of whom had strange birthmarks and disappeared while on the way to meet with friends at night. It was hard to deny that they weren't linked. After hearing Giss and Tyrek's account, Ruger began doing what he does best, running con schemes. He started flashing gold coins around like they were no big deal and acted like someone potentially interested in investing in the tavern's future. From all accounts, the barkeep was eating out of his hands, talking about sprucing the place up, increasing the quality of the food and drink, and thereby attracting a more sophisticated clientele. That, of course, would be a tall order in this neighborhood, but Ruger is very good at what he does. With the promise of higher paying clients and a significant boost in income, the barkeep began to open up. He confirmed that the man with the peg leg was named Hendrak, and that he was often accompanied by a hunchback named Andrel Tribilius. Apparently, both of these men were members of the Temple of the Ebon Hand, a church that is engaged in charitable work involving disfigured, deformed, and maimed people. People who have untreatable injuries and conditions can go to this church and receive help getting back on their feet, figuratively, for some of them. That's not to say that this group heals these maladies. To the contrary, they believe scars, diseases, missing limbs, and deformities are in fact blessings to be envied. First of all, this is sick and twisted logic. Secondly, our observations of these men made it hard to picture them as anything close to being charitable. Supposedly, they even have a large church in the Temple District, despite their relatively small following. After asking around, we found out the rumor is that another faith once occupied that church, but they had had some sort of vision about the doom of Ptolus, and the entire congregation gathered along the King's River to conduct some ritual to avert the catastrophe, and all of them, to the last man, was swept away in a freak flood that came out of nowhere. And with their church suddenly unoccupied and unclaimed, the Temple of the Ebon Hand somehow slid right in to replace them. The barkeep confirmed what we had observed, at least as far as the Troll Skull Tavern is concerned. Pegleg comes in and tries to get people worked up about Ratmen. We thought if this church was behind the disappearance of the children, and we believe they are, this show of concern about Ratmen is likely a red herring to distract people from what is really going on. Over the next couple of days, we looked a bit more into the Ebon Hand and discovered their high priest was a man named Malik, and rumors suggested that he had recently hired a bodyguard named Freen Abathon, a well-known sellsword. These are just names for now, but we will look into these two and see if any cracks appear in their facade. We were already convinced that they were behind the abductions, so we decided to watch the place, just in case we decided to raid it. The golden cross marks the spot. Finding the Temple of the Ebon Hand was not difficult. It was, after all, a large building, and they did nothing to hide their presence. They put themselves forth as a legitimate charitable faith, working diligently to provide succor to the maimed, diseased, and deformed. Having quite a few irons in the fire, we had to split up. We continued watching the Troll Skull Tavern in case Hendrak showed back up, but some of us began watching the comings and goings of the temple as well. Back in Tarsus, we were one of many independently operating factions trying to make the barbarians feel unwelcome. We were always on the lookout for their spies, who were actively trying to find and eliminate groups like ours. However, sometimes we would see others surveilling the same target we were after, We learned to use body language to determine if others lurking in the night were a concern from which we must flee, or if they were also up to no good, and we could work together for a common cause. While surveilling the temple, Ruger noticed a young female gnome in leather armor also watching the place. Ruger's trained eye could tell she was also up to no good. She made intentional eye contact and motioned for us to come have a talk. After a silent barrage of discreet magical messages, we silently withdrew from our positions and leisurely strolled off, meeting in one of the small gardens scattered in the temple district intended for silent reflection and meditation. Even when you're pretty sure you're on the same side, things can be cagey in situations like this. We came from a place where mistaking a person's motives could get you killed, or worse. This young lady did not have that issue. Either she had been confident she had sized us up correctly, or she had not yet learned the hard lessons that forged us into who we are. With no prompting, she introduced herself as Decius Paleth, a member of the Knights of the Golden Cross. Gisselfried later told us that they are one of the oldest organizations in the city, and that they occasionally intercede on behalf of those who cannot defend themselves, though they don't hold a charter from the Commissar to enforce the laws in Ptolus. In other words, they have a bit in common with us. We introduced ourselves, but we were a little tight-lipped considering we didn't know anything about her and knew only a few rumors about her organization. To be honest, it was a little weird how forthcoming she was, but after she had looked us up and down, she told us that the Ebon Hand had also caught their attention, and they were watching them to gather evidence for their own investigation. It was clear that we were both working toward the same goal, and it would be beneficial for us to meet and compare notes. Decius invited us to the headquarters of the Knights of the Golden Cross in Old Town for further discussion. I don't know what we were expecting, but I doubt it was the place she led us to. This building was extremely old and appeared to be in need of substantial repairs. Honestly, it looked more like a building we'd have to go to root out some goblins, more so than the headquarters of a respected knighthood. The interior was passable, at least by our lofty standards, cultivated in Olaf's flophouse. We were seen into a relatively nice chamber with plenty of seating and a warm hearth. It was dark but comfortably lit. They offered us drinks and the introductions of other members currently in attendance. Their leader was an elven woman named Kara Swanwing. Also in attendance was a female half-elf cleric named Utha Wolanat, and a male harrow-elf paladin named Tui Severwing. We had as close to a heart-to-heart as we're capable of, and as it turns out, we were both preparing to move on the temple, but for slightly different reasons. They also had investigated the disappearance of Christiane, and suspected the Ebon Hand may have her, but had no proof. Another thing they uncovered was that the temple was targeting a group of people called the Runeborn. We knew the two missing girls we were looking for had birthmarks, and apparently Runeborn had a rune on their body that could be mistaken as such. We got quite the lesson on the history of the Runeborn. Throughout history, they appear when there is a great need and seem to command powers beyond that of a normal person. They are meant to be some sort of saviors, and this cult was hunting them down. We told them we had reason to believe this cult had abducted two young ladies that were supposed to have unusual birthmarks, and we had been watching some of their members who were searching for kids bearing those marks. In our minds, that sealed the fate of the Temple of the Ebon Hand. However, Kara wanted more evidence before she was prepared to commit her people to any kind of assault. Though we were prepared to raid the temple on our own, it never hurts to have backup. So we decided to do whatever it took to get enough evidence to convince them to help us. We planned to contact one another using coded messages on a public message board that we could see from a studio apartment that Ruger had recently rented under one of his false identities. When one of us had the evidence, we'd get together and take the cult down. We went back to staking out the Troll Skull Tavern in the Warrens, waiting until Hendrak showed up again. We didn't have long to wait. When he came in, we ambushed him. I tackled him to the floor, and between me, Phelan, and Gisselfried, we were able to immobilize him quickly. Ruger pulled out a potion that we had found in the flooded complex a couple of weeks ago and drank it. It was a potion of mind reading, highly illegal in Ptolus, but worth the risk. Then Ruger leaned in, almost brushing noses with the large man. When asked where they took the children, Hendrak denied knowing what we were talking about and demanded we unhand him. However, Ruger picked up a mental image of a secret door under an altar and of children cowering in cages. The old one-legged bastard put up a struggle, but Phelan kicked the crap out of him, knocking him out. We tied him up and started to walk out, leaving him on the floor of the bar. Gisselfried even stole his peg leg and began using the leather straps to wrap one end so he could use it as a club. The barkeep went pale. I don't think this was the first fight he had seen, but it appeared he was no longer under the delusion that Ruger would be financing any facelifts for the Troll Skull Tavern. Still, Ruger sauntered over to the bar and placed a couple of fistfuls of gold coins on the counter in front of the man. Pushing one pile forward, he told him, "This one is for you. We were never here." Pushing the second pile forward, he loudly proclaimed, "Free drinks for everyone in here until this runs out." The barkeep recovered quickly, snatching up the gold and began filling tankards as patrons, no longer concerned for their own safety, began rushing toward the bar for their free drinks. I felt bad leaving the guy on the floor like that. And don't get me wrong, I didn't feel any sympathy for him, but in my eyes, he was a loose end that needed to be tied off. It just wasn't realistic to bring him with us or to gut him in front of all of these patrons. People may stay silent after witnessing a simple beating, but will surely go to the guard after seeing a man get murdered. Trying to hurry so we could beat our one-legged friend to the temple, we hastened to alert the Knights of the Golden Cross. We pounded on their door with urgency and were let in. We told them we had all the evidence we needed, straight from the mind of one of the cultists, and we were going to conduct the raid, right now. We told them that we know where the kids are, and they appear to have been abused. When we get going, we're like a boulder the size of a house rolling downhill. I think the Knights of the Golden Cross sensed this and decided they needed to either get on board or get out of the way. Kara stayed behind, saying she would get support from the Knights of the Pale, though we weren't really sure if we needed more support. Desis, Tui, and Utha grabbed their gear and came with us, strapping on weapons and armor as we double-timed it to the Temple District. The assault on the cult of the Ebon Hand. Planning an operation like this with others was not as easy as we had liked. Tui was certainly more of a proponent for an upfront and personal approach. Knock on the door, declare intent, and if they resist, deal with it with lethal justice. I'm all for lethal justice. It was the part where we simply knock and announce ourselves where we had the problem. Decius ended up being a mediator between the two groups, and with her urging, Tui relented. Some. Our plan was to simultaneously penetrate the temple through windows on opposite sides of the building, entering chambers off the side of the main worship area, while Tui approached the front door with all of his Harrow Elf attributes in full view, carrying the small Decius over his shoulder, as if he were delivering another child to the fold. We all got into position. We heard Tui knock. Loud. We heard the door open. Timing was critical. The windows were locked though, and weren't giving in easily. Then we heard the twang of Decius's hand crossbow, then a thud. A sword was drawn. Yells of alarm from inside the temple. Damn those windows. Our timing was thrown off, but I ended up telling my group to follow me. I raised my shield and rushed straight through the window, crashing through in a shower of multicolored glass. I could feel everyone rush past me as I got my legs back under me and burst out of the door into the main worship hall. I hefted my crossbow and stepped out into the light to find the battle underway. There were a number of cultists, all with some sort of deformity, amputation, or affliction. Among them were figures who appeared to be priests or officers of the cult, including a woman wearing a uniform, the uniform of a city guard. She was armored in half plate and wielding a great axe. Another man bore the trappings of a city official. We knew that the corruption ran deep in Ptolus, but now we saw it in full view. It was critical that we carry out this assault before the City Watch could intervene, protect these degenerates, and arrest us for doing the right thing. Ruger, Phelan, and Tui quickly engaged the cultists near the altar. Tui wielded two swords and quickly coated both of them in the blood of the cultists. Decius and I fired our crossbows, lending support where we could. It took me so long to recover from crashing through that window that I knew I wouldn't need my sword for the first part of this fight. Gisselfried and Uther called upon the power of their gods, summoning holy fire and light to burn the corrupt bastards. The battle was quick and bloody, with horrors unleashed on both sides. One cultist had exploding boils that reeked and just about made Phelan lose his lunch. We didn't do anything tricky, we just slaughtered them. At first, I thought the guard in half-plate would be a concern, but Tui cut her down with practiced ease. The city official shot Ruger with a gun cane, but barely injured him. Knowing the weapon had to be reloaded before it was dangerous again, Ruger casually brandished his daggers while slowly stalking toward the man. He had backed into a small office off the side of the main worship area. He tried to hide behind his office, threatening all of us with ruin, but Ruger wasn't intimidated. Old diseased men sliding off your blade aren't very scary. I can't explain it, but I was so on edge I couldn't concentrate. A sense of urgency threatened to smother me. So when most of the group was questioning the soon-to-be deceased city official, I went to examine the altar, desperate to find the secret door leading to the children. Phelan must have seen the look in my eyes because he split off from the others and helped me search. We soon found a small ornamental piece that released the altar, allowing it to swing to the side, revealing a staircase going down. However, as the altar swung away, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye as something fell from the ceiling. I instinctively reached out and caught it. surprising myself for a second. It was a large glass bottle containing a sickly green-looking fluid. It bubbled inside with puffs of yellow-green vapor as it sloshed around in the thankfully stoppered container. We later found out, had the bottle broken, we would have been smack dab in the center of a poisonous gas cloud. I pocketed the bottle, and with the balance of the party arriving at the altar, we began our descent. At the bottom of the stairs, we saw a gut-wrenching sight. The stairs ended in a large room with a large rug positioned in the center. Cultists turned to face us as sickly green light drew our gaze to the left, to another room extended off the side of the main worship area. And the green light emanated from a couple of fluid-filled vats. In each of the vats was a partially mutated child, both motionless. Hoses ran from each of the vats to a cultist seated between them. His eyes were rolled back in his head, and he seemed unconscious. The vats were feeding off of him, or he was somehow powering them with his own body. Near the vats, in a cramped cage covered in scrapes and bruises, was another terrified child in rags, with red hair and blue eyes. I recognized her from Tenpin Orphanage. This was Celine. I felt drawn to Celine, but as much as I wanted to go to her, the cultists down here began approaching us, weapons in hand. On the far side of the room stood a tall man in robes, sporting an elaborate mask in the shape of a black hand. Malik. Beside him was a woman, dressed in the trappings of a barbarian, great axe in her hands. That would be the sellsword, Freen Abathon. To Malik's other side was a large dog, really large, with jet black fur, glowing red eyes, and a mouth full of what looked to be burning embers. This was a hound, straight out of hell. As we advanced to meet them, one of the cultists ran to a door across the room from the vats and swung it open. Seeing a huge mutated beast in there, Phelan rushed over and slammed the door shut again, giving the cultist that opened it a sharp crack across the jaw for his trouble. As we advanced on the cultist, the rug beneath us began to move and sway, as if it were trying to wrap itself around anyone who stepped on it. Noting the cultists were avoiding the rug, we recognized it as some sort of magical trap, and thankfully avoided its smothering embrace without too much injury. The cultists were unarmored, but attacked without fear. I saw Gisselfried step up and swing a club, doubling over one scabbed up man. But it was no club. It was Hendrak's wooden leg. Fitting that it would find its first use here. I'm not sure what it is with me and dogs, but I soon found myself face to face with the black, fire-breathing hound, while Ruger and Tui pressed Malik and the sellsword barbarian woman. We had hoped the large, mutated creature would stay put in its room, but with a crash, the door violently swung open, nearly coming off its hinges. The mutated creature emerged, dragging the half-eaten remains of a human with it. This creature resembled the dead child in the vat by the way it was mutated, but it looked like this was the finished product, where the one in the vat was still cooking. Another thing was that this beast was huge, standing around 7 feet tall with corded muscle and a stout frame. Everything about it was wrong. Nothing was symmetrical. It had numerous open wounds, and its scream shook the foundation of the temple. Though it was terrible to behold, I felt a profound sadness as it came into the room. This was once a child, with their whole life ahead of them, and these monsters took them against their will and transformed them into this thing. The shock I had been experiencing turned into rage. Though I mourned the loss of this child, I knew we had to put him or her out of its misery. The creature attacked with supernatural strength and ferocity, but we outnumbered it. Surrounding it, we came in from all sides, slashing at it from behind as it darted forward to attack those in front of it. The thing was incredibly tough and dealt quite a bit of damage to us. My whole arm went numb just from catching a glancing blow on my shield, and I staggered back before recovering my feet. Dermal bone covered patches of skin, so many blows that would have landed otherwise deflected harmlessly away. Both Gisselfried and Utha had their work cut out for them, just keeping us alive long enough to wear it down. Eventually, it fell from countless cuts and blunt injuries. With Utha and Gis there to keep us standing, the battle was soon over. The fight ended with Ruger and Phelan chasing Malik, the high priest, from the main room and into a side bedchamber. He seemed focused on something, and we knew what when he grabbed a handful of papers and threw them into a burning brazier. Phelan sent the priest's teeth flying across the room, and Ruger broke his fall with a dagger through the base of his skull. Noting the contents of the brazier, Ruger quickly reached in and snatched as much of the unburned documents as he could, earning himself some burns on his hands and arms. However, he did manage to save a scrap of parchment with some writing on it. We examined the body of the mutated creature and found remains of a rune on the thing's back, crisscrossed with scar tissue where they tried to deface it. This confirmed what we already knew. This wretched creature was a rune-born child that was turned into a mindless monster using some sick and perverted technology. Once the immediate threat was over, I went to Celine, while the others searched the rest of the underground complex. Understandably, her first reaction was to recoil from me. It probably didn't help that I was covered from head to toe in blood and gore. I knelt down to appear less threatening and assured her that she was safe and had nothing to fear from me. Then, I opened the cage to let her out. I gave her my cloak, and she grabbed me in a fierce, desperate hug, breaking down and sobbing. Examining her wounds, I saw her rune-shaped birthmark, what I would later come to know as Augies. Looking at the children in the vats, I saw other runes partially covered in scar tissue. Enraged, I kicked over the chair containing the last living cultist, sending him sprawling across the floor. He simply twitched a little as the tubes coming from his mouth pulsated. I turned to Celine and asked her what I should do with him. Her reply was only 2 words, but powerful nonetheless. Kill him. This garbage was instrumental in the torture and death of these kids. He didn't deserve a peaceful send-off. Fighting to contain a burning rage I could not fully explain, I placed a foot on his throat and pressed. Hard, grinding it under my heel until he stopped twitching. I became aware that I was grinding my teeth, and it occurred to me that I must be terrifying Celine. However, when I looked at her, I saw she was staring with undisguised rage at the lifeless body. It seemed that we were on the same page. The others had cleared the rest of the basement and were gathered to look at the strange apparatus. We found notes which we grabbed so we could read them later. It now looked as if both children in the vats were dead, an assumption that would later come back to haunt me. One was a young man, maybe 12 or 13 years old. The other was a girl with long black hair. We had found Christy Ann, but we were too late. The others had also found a blood-stained golden bowl a bowl they said looked to be used in some kind of sacrificial ritual. When something organic was placed inside of it, inky black tentacles filled the bowl, consuming the sacrifice. I took their word for it and didn't need a demonstration. It was about then that 4 people entered the basement, looking around at the bodies and the blood on the floor and the walls, and even a little on the ceiling. One was Kyra Swanwing, walking with a dark-bearded man that she introduced as Stanislav, another of the Knights of the Golden Cross. With them was a pair of human warriors, Cardillion and Dartalius, members of the Knights of the Pale, an organization chartered by the Commissar to help rid the city of evil. Technically, we were not authorized to right the wrongs we discover, but Kyra brought the Knights of the Pale in to lend some legitimacy to our enterprise. Without them, all the loot would be confiscated as evidence, and we could end up in jail. The more I discover about how this city is run, the more I hate it. Especially considering the victims here, these rune-born children, were being hunted by disgusting monsters like the Ebon Hand, and more. They looked the place over, the bodies, the vats, the mutated children, and there was no question whether or not they thought this a worthy endeavor. We asked the Knights of the Pale to tell the City Watch that all the children found in the temple had died, and to forget ever having seen Selene. They balked at first, but we argued that the cultists that were still at large may try to kidnap Selene again. She wouldn't be safe at Tenpin. And given the presence of the city guard and a city official above, we couldn't trust the authorities either. This argument resonated with them, so they agreed to take Selene into protective custody. Hearing this, Selene grabbed me, looking up at me with panic in her eyes. She whispered, "Don't let them take me. I want to stay with you." Perhaps it was because I knew her from Tenpin, but I didn't want them to take her either. I told them I would take Selene and hide her from other predators. I could tell Ruger and Phelan did not think this was a good idea, and everyone asked me if I was sure about this. I just felt that this was the way it had to be. The Knights of the Pale agreed to hide her involvement. We agreed to meet up again soon so that we could discuss and divvy up the valuables they were able to officially claim down here. And with that, we hightailed it out of there before the guard arrived. In the aftermath of the raid, we discovered the vats and associated equipment was called Chaositech, and the notes we found were instructions on how to operate it. It appears that Chaositech is not quite technology or magic, at least as we understand it. According to the papers Malik tried to burn, we were able to piece together that the equipment was given to the Ebon Hand by the Temple of the Rat God, and the Black Hellish Dog, a gift from someone named Shigma Wuntad and a group calling themselves the Forsaken. The note also seemed to be a rallying cry for the cults of Ptolus to band together for some evil and malaligned purpose. This wasn't good. After a bit of asking around, we discovered Shigma is a title of leadership in the Forsaken, and that they are some kind of undead-loving organization based out of the necropolis. We learned that Wuntad is a former member of the Crimson Coil, another cult, with a profound history with the Knights of the Pale. Unfortunately, not all of the Ebon Hand cultists were in attendance when we conducted our cleansing, and the survivors went to ground after the temple fell. Later, we even saw a bounty on our old friend, the Hunchback, Andrel Tribilius, who is now wanted by the Commissar. The temple apparently will go to another church. It had better be a pretty holy church to quiet all the restless souls that met their ends within those walls. The Knights of the Pale were lauded for their duty to the city and received all the glory. You know, they can have the glory, all they want. Later, Kyra Swanwing informed us that the young man in the vat had not died after all. Priests called in by the city watch had discovered a faint spark of life and was able to stabilize him. The city would be handing him over to the Brotherhood of Redemption to make sure he wouldn't be a menace given his half-altered state. On a more positive note, I adopted Celine as my little sister. We had to change her appearance so she no longer sports the red locks, and we have it in a different style. A new do, a few new outfits, tailored by the expert hands of Fawn, and she's a new person, on the outside. She now stays away from the area of town around Tenpin Orphanage, just in case. We even went to Wondrous Tattoos and had Anagio Quig give her a tattoo that hid her rune in plain sight, using the rune as part of the tattoo's design. We were shocked to find that we couldn't directly cover it up. Any ink applied directly to the rune simply fizzled away. A curiosity that Quig said he had never seen before, not with his inks. Certainly not an ordinary birthmark. She chose a sword and shield overlaying a heart, shattered like crystal. I felt a new name was in order as well, and it was only right to let her choose her own. And so she did. Rena the Anvil.